In 2013, an app started harvesting data on 87 million Facebook users. In 2016, Cambridge Analytica used that big data to target U.S. voters in a presidential election. And 2 years later, a whistleblower revealed the extent of the abuse of big data. And this man saw it all coming. In the age of big data, alternative facts, and privacy abuse, Sandy Pentland wants access to everyone's cell phone.
People have a right to know what's going on. So remember, vested interests don't really want you to see what's happening. Not just the monetary interest, but the political class doesn't really want the facts on the table.
I'm Michael Hainsworth, and this is Futurithmic.
My name's Alex Pentland. I'm a professor at MIT.
He's more than just another professor. Forbes magazine calls Sandy Pentland one of the most powerful data scientists in the world today. In 1986, he co-created the MIT Media Lab. In 1992, he became the wearable computing pioneer who taught the students who created Google Glass, and in 2007 became an advisor to the World Economic Forum. And Sandy Pentland is the scientist his colleagues cite in their work. A successful scientist has a Hirsch index of 20. An outstanding scientist? 40. Pentland? 125.
My job is to see the future and then also to invent ways to deal with the rocks as well as tacking towards the things that are good.
How do you feel about walking down these halls every day?
Well, I'm afraid it's like air to me. I just live here.
Right.
So,
So you're accustomed to this.
Yeah, of course we invent the future here. Right?
Yeah.
What else, right?
Pentland believes information is power, and he wants to put that power back in the hands of the people. And that power is literally in our hands. Biggest source of data for you today has got to be this.
Yeah, because almost every adult in the entire world has one of those.
There would have been an assumption, I can imagine, that the real power of the data in these little glowing rectangles comes from social media. Not the case.
No, the stuff that's really important is the stuff of where you went, what is your daily habit, who do you interact with.
So if I gave you this phone, what could you do with that information?
You can actually see across the whole world. You can see whether policies are working, whether government is doing what it's supposed to do. If we aggregated a bunch of people together, what could we tell about them? And the answer is we could tell about how much money they make. We could look at gender balance. We could look at how integrated you are into society in terms of, do you talk to other people that are very diverse people or not? It turns out that that variable predicts, for instance, infant mortality. That variable predicts crime.
Unemployment?
Unemployment is a certain one. Yeah, absolutely.
In 2016, Pentland did something remarkable. His team convinced Saudi Arabia to hand over the cell phone metadata of 2.8 million cell phone users, the latest 4 million strong unemployment benefit application package, and the census data where all the cell phone towers were in that capital city. It was anonymized from the household level up to the neighborhood block resolution, and then they put it all together. It wasn't much of a surprise. Those who used their smartphones in the evenings and at home were probably unemployed. And those who didn't go straight home after work, they were generally more successful. But it also allowed Pentland and his team to figure out where unemployment was going to be a problem. And that would allow governments to act in real time. And that real-time power works both ways. Pentland believes we must take back control from the data monopolies of corporations and governments.
So what we need to do is aggregate citizens to be able to have our say in how the data is used. And interestingly, already co-ops, credit unions, the things that 100 million Americans, for instance, are already members of, are chartered to do that.
And what do we do with that data?
Well, imagine that you have a small town and half the people or more are members of credit unions. Now, I'll call them data unions,
All right?
And they went to the local hospital system and said, well, you know, say 3/4 or half of the people in the town really want you to do this thing. We see from our data that you're not doing as good as the norm on these sorts of diseases, and you're much above market prices for those sorts of services. You can do better. So the fact that people, groups of people, know what's going on means that they can take monopolies like the medical system, some of the other big companies, and demand better service.
But how do we demand big data isn't weaponized against us?
It's going to take a lot of sort of kicking and screaming and making it happen.
Pentland's solution? At the World Economic Forum, he spearheaded the creation of regulations that are now law in the European Union, and that forces companies that aren't even European-based to adopt their policies because they have operations in Europe. So you have the ability to control the policies of other countries.
Right.
GDPR. It's a set of rules and regulations for your privacy and data protection. It requires a company to follow all the rules. And if the rules are broken, that's a 20 million euro fine, or 4% of revenue, whichever is greater. These are the 6 rules to GDPR. We have to be told what our data will be legally used for. The data can only be used for that intended purpose. Only the requested data can be collected. The data kept on us must be kept up to date, and it can't be kept for longer than it's needed. And our data must be kept secure. If GDPR existed in 2016 when Facebook's leak gave Cambridge Analytica the ability to manipulate voters, Mark Zuckerberg would have cut a check for 1 billion euros. And while Pentland believes big data will set us free tomorrow, big data has a big problem today. Getting 6 billion people to hand over their smartphone data, it's a tough sell. How do you do it?
Well, first of all, we don't. That's rule 1, right? That data belongs to the people who own the cell phone. But to make the cell phone work, it has to talk to a cell tower, okay? And that means that anytime you're anywhere with your cell phone, the cell tower knows that you're in the area. And so the general sort of approach that people are thinking about mostly is not to have data about individual cell phones, but to have data about cell towers.
Weren't you able, though, to say take a cache of credit card information and reverse engineer it and have a really high degree of accuracy as to whose credit card information it was?
Well, so that's actually the key thing in the danger about data is that it's possible to re-engineer it if you have individual level data.
I would have thought you'd want a lot of granularity to something like this.
It turns out it doesn't really buy you that much for most of the sort of social functions, you know, like how you design a city or electricity, making sure there are no brownouts, making sure the buses are in the right place. It just doesn't do that much for you.
How do we ensure that the data that we're using to make decisions down the road isn't racist, isn't sexist, isn't classist?
So what we've been doing is building tools that, first of all, keep track of what's actually happening, not what they say is happening. And second of all, to be able to audit it to see, well, is this actually biased, despite claims to the opposite? Is this actually what we want to have happening? I mean, it doesn't have to be biased or unfair. It could just simply be obnoxious, right? And we'd like to be able to detect that pretty early and be able to go back and say, well, who it is that's doing this and fix it.
But then aren't we just taking the concerns of bias away from the machine and applying it to the auditor? Shouldn't we be worried about the auditor of the data being biased?
So one of the side effects of figuring out the rules for how to audit data is we figure out the rules of how to audit humans, right? The regulators that act like machines in a certain sense. They have rules they're supposed to follow. Are those good rules? Well, currently we don't know.
I keep talking about big data and machine learning because I'm really reluctant to talk to you about artificial intelligence because it strikes me that we're nowhere near the stage where we can call it artificial intelligence.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much buzz about this, but it's really mostly hype. It's going to be a long road before you see things that are general. And I don't think I worry about what it's going to do to society the way some people do, because, again, of those little glowy screens that we call phones.
Right.
And we love them. And the reason that we love them is because they help us as humans live our social life, to live better. They're tools for helping us be human.